Okay, thank you everybody for joining us today for this Yom HaShoah event. We're going to be looking at the connections between Israeli, Italian, British and Ukrainian memories of the Holocaust. You're going to hear from 4 amazing speakers. And yeah, we really wanted to do this Yom HaShoah event because we recently sort of were aware of connections between our research. So some Kindertransport survivors were part of the Jewish Brigade, for example. I met Chiara at a conference recently, Western Galilee, held about children in crisis, and you can see all their videos on YouTube as well. And especially because Yom HaShoah is a time to remember resistance, mourn loved ones, and celebrate life and say the names of the victims. But also, it's going to be very, very different in Ukraine this year, as we all know. And I think it's just an opportunity to sort of remember British connections with Ukraine. So Miriam is going to be talking about her experiences and her travels to Ukraine, but also how the events in Ukraine has really triggered a wave of memorial activism, especially around Kindertransport memorials. So some of you may have seen flags, messages draped on these memorials, and they really are part of memorial activism in these countries. Like they speak to traditional forms of memorialization. So outside the Russian embassy in Berlin, for example, there are signs that say Zelensky Platz, for example, which is in keeping with that memorial tradition. Our memorial tradition, obviously, around Kindertransport memorials is to sort of spur the government into action to take in more refugees. So it's really quite interesting to think about the connections that we have. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce the first speaker, who is Dr. Gianluca Fantoni. He is a senior lecturer in history at Nottingham Trent University. He studies the public use of history and the uses and abuses of history for a political aim. He's recently published an article, but also a book now, on the Jewish Brigade. This came out in the Modern History journal, and the publisher is a very well-known Italian publisher who I'm sure you'll speak about. He also studies the relationships between film and history, and on this subject he has recently published another book which is really interesting, Through the Red Lines: Italian Politics and Society in Communist Propaganda Films 46 to 79. And Gianluca is here to talk to us about the Jewish Brigade, the rescue and rehabilitation of children in post-war Italy, how soldiers from Palestine were instrumental in the reconstruction of the shattered Jewish communities, and much more. So I'll hand over to Gianluca now.
Okay, thank you, Amy, for this introduction, and thank you for the invitation. Shall I try to share my screen now? Okay, yeah, it's working apparently. Here we are. Sure. Okay, I think you can probably see the screen. No, here we are. Let me minimize this. Okay, warriors and rescuers, the Jewish Brigade Group and refugees. This is this research on the Jewish Brigade Group. I started this research I've been researching this topic for quite some time now, a few years. The first output of this research was, as Amy was mentioning, an article published in the Journal of Modern History, which is quite a prestigious, of Chicago, which is quite an important journal. A very long article, 14,000 words, so a double article, really, double the length of a standard article, entitled The Jewish Brigade Group and Italy, a political and historiographical quarrel, because we are not going to talk about this today, but there is also a political and historiographical debate, especially in various countries, but especially in Italy, about the Jewish Brigade Group. So my first interest was for the debate that the Jewish Brigade Group had triggered, because, as Amy pointed out, I study the uses and abuses of history, or the use of public history, so the use of history in in the political arena. Then, of course, while studying this topic, I became passionate with the Jewish Brigade itself, and I decided to know more about these guys, these soldiers. So I ended up, writing and doing much more research about the Jewish Brigade group rather than the present day political debate. And this resulted in my second publication, which is very fresh, if you like, 18th of January, Storia della Brigata Ebraica. For those of you who can read Italian, that means simply a history of the Jewish Brigade. The subtitle reads, The Jews of Palestine who fought in Italy during World War II. And this is a marvelous photo, fantastic photos of these soldiers just in front of the Colosseum. It's very small, but you can notice that there is a David star on the van, on the door of the lorry. Those are actual soldiers of the Jewish Brigade. The book covers the long bargaining between the Jewish Agency, which was the representative of the Yishuv. The Yishuv is the Hebrew, the Jewish community in Palestine in the years of the mandate, of the British mandate. This is a very British history, by the way, a British story, if you like, because the Jewish Brigade group was a brigade of a military unit of the British Army, and its formation happened during the years of the mandate, of the British mandate on Palestine. So it covers the long bargaining between the Jewish Agency and the British government, eventually leading to the establishment of the Jewish Brigade group in late summer 1944. Talks about the Jewish Brigade's military feats in Italy. They fought in Italy. They were sent to the front. Accounts for the works that the Jewish Brigade soldiers did with the European refugees, and tells how they helped the Italian Jews to recover from years of persecution and the near total annihilation of their communities. The persecution of the Italian Jews had started in 1938 with the promulgation of the racial laws targeting Jewish citizens, laws wanted by Benito Mussolini and by the fascist dictatorship. There was no, however, deportation until 1943, when Italy was switched side. Italy, surrendered to the Allied, and as a result, the Nazi troops occupied the center and the north of Italy, killing a lot of civilians, also non-Jewish civilians, but also almost inevitably, given the Nazi policies, they started the deportation of Italian Jews to concentration camp, to Auschwitz and other camps, and many died. It was very very painful. The books finally analyzes and discuss memory and memorialization of the Jewish Brigade group in Israel, Italy, and the Anglo-Saxon world, and the political controversy that said memorialization at times stirred, particularly in Italy. But as we said, today in this talk, we are not going to talk about that. But what is the Jewish Brigade group, you may wonder? So it was a military unit of the British Army established in September 1944 and incorporating Jewish soldiers, many of them from Palestine. They were not all Jews. There were around 3,000 Palestinian Jews, 1,000 English Jews, and 1,000 non-Jews, Gentiles, mainly Scottish. I like to point this out because I lived 7 years in Glasgow, so Scotland is very dear to me. The Jewish Agency, the principal Zionist organization of Palestine, had lobbied the British government in order to obtain the formation of an all-Jewish military unit since September 1939. So the offer was made quite early on in the war, okay? However, the government refused, the British government refused, delayed the creation of this brigade for 5 years. By granting that request, the Jewish Agency conjectured His Majesty actually at the time, government would have implicitly recognized the existence of the Jewish national element in Palestine, a prelude to the establishment of a Jewish nation. For that very reason, as I was saying before, the Palestine Mandate authorities vehemently opposed the project, successfully delaying its implementation until summer 1944. Here you have a map of the British Mandate for Palestine, okay? The part in yellow. In the end, however, insistence from American politicians and above all, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill's personal fondness for the Jewish national cause made a difference, and the Jewish Brigade Group became a reality. Initially, they struggled a little bit to find enough soldiers, not because the Jews did not want to fight, but because many of them were already fighting or were already enlisted in corps, for example, in the logistical and support corps, which were operating in various countries, including Greece and other nations. By that time, finding new recruits had become difficult because the Yishuv had no longer large availability of men of military age. Also, the war was by then very far from Palestine and virtually won, so many felt that there was no need. They lacked the motivation to enlist. The British Army thought that the Palestinians could not be entrusted with special services, for example, be given the army radio codes, because there was almost this diffidence towards the Palestinians. Yes, the Jewish brigade had been created, but the British authorities, and especially the military, did not trust the Palestinians because they thought they might revolt at some point once the war was over. So the order was not to give them, for example, any sensitive, not to place them in any sensitive spot, like, for example, entrusting them with the army radio codes. Superior officers had to be British citizens because, of course, English soldiers could not be given order by colonial troops, although the Palestinians were not, Palestine was not exactly a colony at the time, not technically. No training was ever given to Palestinians with artillery or armored vehicle. That means that, of course, you needed Gentiles to drive the vehicles and to operate the artillery. Although in the end there were a few batteries which were actually manned by Palestinian soldiers. Hence the 1,000 Gentiles which were incorporated in the brigade. The bulk of the Jewish Brigade Group was formed by the previous Palestine Regiment, which was established as early as 1941 and included both Jews and Arabs of Palestine. So there was a time in which, and it's I think very interesting to tell this today, there was a time in which Arabs of Palestine and Jews of Palestine fought together. They served together under the same flag, under the Union flag. Okay, although fought not really, because they were never sent to the front. They operated in logistical services, but they were wearing the same uniform, and they were fighting for the same cause. The Jews were there was a larger number of Jews if compared to the Arabs. Nonetheless, a few thousand Arabs of Palestine did enlist. Oh, who are the men of the Jewish Brigade Group? Let me quote here from this book, a very nice book, With the Jewish Brigade by Barnard M. Casper, who was the senior chaplain of the brigade, so a rabbi, a very young rabbi, who was the senior chaplain of the brigade. And in one of the pages, he tells us who were the soldiers of the Jewish Brigade, and I quote: former refugees from Germany, men who had run away from Austria, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania for fear of the descending Nazis, early pioneers who had gone up to build the land 20 or 30 years ago, from Russia and Poland, romantic-looking, dark-skinned Yemenite Jews, and black Falasha from Abyssinia. These were the bulk of the 54 countries which were represented in the brigade, but which were now all welded into a new Palestinian spirit and tradition. So 54 countries. So certainly there were also Ukrainians. Well, you name it. I mean, there were Jews from all over from many different countries. that is one of the most interesting aspects of the Jewish Brigade. That its international character, if you like. Then the brigadier, the commanding officer was Brigadier Benjamin, who was a Canadian Jew who could not speak Hebrew. He was, he was raised in a sort of non-religious environment, but that during his staying with the Jewish Brigade started to study Jewish language, Hebrew language and Jewish traditions, and in order to be closer to his soldiers. Oh, not just men though, Palestinian women did their part too. I would like to stress this. Here you can see posters which were issued by the British government and posted in the walls of Tel Aviv and Jerusalem to invite women to join the army. Of course, not in combatant roles, but in the support services, in the logistical service. These were the famous ATS, the auxiliaries of the British Army. And look at these posters. I find them very interesting because they are very empowering. They seem to suggest that by joining the British Army, Palestinian women will gain a certain degree of independence and emancipation. Look at the woman who can, who drives the car so confidently. This is the very reason why many in Palestine were displeased by these posters. We have to understand that Palestinian society at the time was quite conservative. And the idea of women joining the army alone without, without any male supervision was not welcomed by everyone. In particular, we know of some rabbis who talked against the enlistment of women, thinking that they were claiming that they were choosing a life of sins. They were turning into sinners. Nonetheless, then think of the subversion of gender roles that certainly angered and worried many of Palestinian men. That was even more true, of course, for the Arab segment of the population, because the Arab population of Palestine was even more conservative, of course, than the Jewish population. In the end, however, a few thousand Jewish women joined the ATS, and around 200 Arab women, mostly Christians, from Palestine, also joined. If you want to know more about that, there is this fantastic book by Anat Granit Acohen, Hebrew Women Joined the Forces. And also there are a lot of documents online in the National Archives that I have researched quite a lot in order to write the book and the article. They have a special session about Palestinian women in the forces, online. So you can, it's easy to find more also original document. The Jewish Brigade group was dispatched to Italy in late 1944 and participated in the liberation of the country from Nazi occupation. Although their contribution to the war was of limited importance from a strictly military point of view, the political importance of their presence in Europe cannot be overemphasized. The Jewish Brigade soldiers simply arrived too late to make a real difference in the conflict. They joined the fight in March 1945, so there was the war was almost over. They fought well, though, but in minor actions. Around 50 of them were listed as fatal casualties in the end. But the best, inverted comma, part of the GB, sorry, I forgot the G, history began after the end of World War II, however, because they were committed to the recovery of Italian Jewry and Judaism. They helped the survivors of concentration camp who were flocking to Italy from Central Europe and from Central and Eastern Europe, hoping to find a passage to Palestine. They were organizing those. They were, among those who organized those the ships to move them to Palestine, but also they offered them food and shelter and some sort of material support and also moral support. The soldiers of the Jewish Brigade made thousands of small yet vital actions, like, for example, I'm just quoting randomly, reopening the Jewish school, reopening of Jewish school like the Vittorio Polacco Primary School of Rome, the opening of I hope I pronounce it correctly, HaShoah training center to form a new generation of chalutzim, of pioneers, to prepare the young people, younger, or less young people, for the immigration to Palestine. They established camps for Jewish children. They went to search for Torahs and other sacred objects missing from synagogues. They managed to recover quite a lot of them. There are also moving stories of Jewish soldiers being approached by a Gentile who tell them, come with me, and then they go in the house of this man, and they find that he had hidden under his floor all the object of the local synagogue, because while being not a Jew, he wanted to help out the Jews, so he had hidden all the Torahs and all the other object in his house, waiting for the end of the war. And as soon as this guy sees the soldiers with the Star of David on the shoulders, he recognized them as Jews, and he returned the objects. So there are, and sometimes, of course, these battle-hardened soldiers of the Jewish brigade were moved to tears by episodes like the one I just mentioned. There was a huge logistical effort. The Jewish soldiers the soldiers of the Jewish brigade had to find food, clothes, soap, shoes, bed, blankets, Bibles for thousands of people who had nothing, having just arrived from the camps or having survived for years in hiding in monastery, barns, or in the attics of their Gentile neighbors. Very often they were in desperate conditions. People were really nothing. It's difficult for us to imagine what it means to be a refugee. And yet there are so many refugees even nowadays. Some units should be mentioned. The 178th RASC unit, which was the transport unit, they drove lorries, who became part of the Jewish brigade. That was really part of the Jewish brigade group, of the fighting force. It was the commander was Wellesley Haron, who played an important part in the history of the Jewish brigade, and also and beyond. In the end, they started stealing supplies from British Army depots. They started to rob stuff, because there was, there was not enough for the refugees, and they decided that feeding and clothing them was more important than obeying orders, and so they started to steal quite a lot of material from British Army depots. I think it was for a good cause. So as far as I can say, that was it was a good cause. The actions, of course, of these soldiers were also inspired by Zionist ideology. For example, in the training center, the youngsters were indoctrinated into Zionism and thus encouraged to emigrate to Palestine. Sometimes against the wishes of their parents, because not all the Jews of Italy or of Europe were Zionists and wanted to emigrate to Palestine. Soldiers went as far as to give Italian children Hebrew names, which again could perhaps anger or displease their parents. Not just that, they were trained to live and work in the kibbutz, the collective farms of Palestine. That, according to the soldiers of the Jewish brigade, was the highest form of Zionist life. The majority of the soldiers of the Jewish brigade indeed came from the kibbutz, and they were socialists. In the kibbutz, according to the Zionist ideology, the European Jews could experience their own regeneration. The Alutz, the settler, was the new kind of Jew. That was in line with what Todd Samuel Presner, an important historian, has defined the Moscow Jew ideal. The tough, aggressive, and battle-ready Jew. This had been the ideal male Jew of Zionism since its foundation, and as a counter, it was meant to counter the stereotypical Eastern European Jew who was seen as combat shy, physically weak, and exclusively devoted to intellectual activities. Of course, like in every ideological representation, there was a lot of approximation, because I'm sure that not all the Eastern European Jews were, intellectual and physically weak. This is proved, for example, by the fact that by the episodes like the ghetto, the Warsaw Ghetto uprising, and not all the Jews of Palestine were the masculine Jew. So there was a lot of but ideologies like that. No, it works by simplification. It simplifies reality. Anyway, there was a lot of that in the action, a lot of ideal or ideological motivation in the action of some of the soldiers of the Jewish brigade. Another thing they did was the battle against conversion. There were a lot of conversion during the war and in post-war years of Italian Jews to Catholicism. That was due to various reasons. For example, the breaking of communities, the attempt to escape deportation and persecution, or simply the need to feel accepted by society that the experience of persecution could have fueled. The marriage with Gentiles who had saved them, gratitude towards the Catholic Church who had saved a lot of Jews. So many Jews were converting to Catholicism. There was also the case, quite shocking case of Israel Zolli, who was the chief rabbi of Rome. Originally from Hungary, his name was Zoller, Italianized in Zolli. He converted to Catholicism and he was the chief rabbi of Rome. That was, quite shocking, of course, for the Jewish in Italy. So in that situation, we saw atheist soldiers fighting apostasy. Because, of course, many of these the great majority of the soldiers of the Jewish Brigade group were not religious at all. They were atheists, they were socialists, and therefore they didn't believe in God. However, in that occasion, they started to campaign to defend Judaism, to fight against conversion. That was because they needed people to remain Jews in order for them to be willing to move to Palestine. And to create a Jewish nation. In this respect, there was also an instrumental use of religion, which sometimes the older members of the Italian communities disliked, because these Jewish soldiers were talking a lot about Judaism, but purely from a political point of view. They didn't have any spiritual dimension in their Judaism. It was just politics. Was just political to them. So the older members of the Italian Jewish community were like, oh, wait, this is not really what Judaism is about. Okay, so there was an overlapping of the political and the religious. The Jewish Brigade, the soldiers of the Jewish Brigade group managed to have a strong appeal on the youngest members of the Italian Jewish community. However, in the end, so the young Italian Jews all became all Zionists in a matter of weeks, really. However, very few eventually emigrated to Palestine. And most notably, the survivors of the camps did not. This is something that has been studied. There was still in the Italian Jewry a lot of attachment to Italy and to their Italian roots. So not many wanted to emigrate to Palestine, so much so that the Jewish soldiers from Palestine started to call the Italian Jews, Zionists with seasickness, So they were all on the paper very enthusiastic Zionists, but in the end they didn't want to board the ships and go to Palestine. So Zionists with seasickness. Okay, you know what, there is another part on what the Jewish Brigade group did in Germany. However, perhaps we can just stop here. They don't want to use too much time, and perhaps take a few questions. What do you think? Sorry, I should. No.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Thank you ever so much for such a fascinating talk. I think it's really important, obviously, how this period in history links directly to the British narrative of the Holocaust. We often think of the Kindertransport, the liberation of Bergen-Belsen, and more recently, scholars are looking at what happened in the Channel Islands, but also the Kitchener camp. And I think as Miriam said, as you know, just before we started recording, that this is something that isn't always discussed with regards to British history. So it's been a fascinating talk. Yeah, let's open the floor up to questions then. Has anybody got any questions for Gianluca?
I would like to ask something.
Yes, sure.
You told something about the recruitment of the women in the army, and I was curious to know if you find something, or if you wrote about this topic. What was the role of the women in Italy, if you have find something? And I was curious also about this. You were talking now about the soldiers were worried about the Jews, the Italian Jews who converted to Catholicism. So I found in my research I found reference to this topic, but I never found what the soldiers do to, let's say, save or bring back this Jew to the Jewish community.
Yes, now while you were talking, I was trying to find the place. You know, I have my book here, the exact point in which I talk about the ATS. And of course, I cannot find it. But yeah, well, I've read the documents in the National Archives on what the Palestinian women did in Palestine. And in general, what were they supposed to do? They were supposed to, work as secretaries, typewriter, but also they were trained in repairing engines of the trucks, for example, and in driving. So all the logistical services basically were entrusted to them. And we know for certain that some also operated in Italy, because we have also films of them returning from Europe and you know, disembarking along with the soldiers. We see a few women in uniform. So I didn't really find any account of their presence in Italy, for example, by Italians. But I do not exclude that there are some. Simply I didn't stumble onto them. So perhaps in the future I will find more. Of course, also it wasn't really the focus of the book, but nonetheless I wanted to include that slide to remind that nothing is ever just a men's business, not even war. I mean, that's okay.
And I think Mara's got a question.
Hello, thank you very much, Gianluca. Thank you very much for your paper. It was really interesting. I have a question regarding to Italy again, and I was wondering about the Jews who fought in the resistance, and whether you knew something about that, considering both gender again, because my interest lies in the literature, or what I like to call, let's say, the literature of hiding. So I mostly work on diaries of Jews that managed to avoid deportation from 1943 onward. So I was wondering whether you have something. I was thinking about Rita Rosani, for instance. Just curious. Thank you very much.
Yes. Let me find this time. This time I know exactly where to find. Of course, the contribution of the Italian Jews to the resistance was paramount. Let me find
So I was considering, for instance, Picciotto's volume Salvarsi.
Yes.
Yeah.
I need to find that. I haven't read that book. I know it exists. I need to find it. Okay, so many Jews joined the Italian resistance. There are 7 golden medals awarded to Italian Jews who fought in the resistance. One of them is Rita Rosani.
Exactly.
And there are other 6. And actually, this will be my next project. I would like to do research on the Italian, this time to shift the focus from the British Army to the Italian Jews, what they did during the war. Leo Valiani, Emilio Sereni was the brother of Renzo Sereni. Those were among the two of the the chiefs, among the two chiefs of the Italian resistance, and they were both Jews.
Yeah.
The youngest partisans that fallen in action was a Jew. Was called Cesana. He died at the age of 13 fighting against the Nazis. Okay, so the contribution is paramount. And yes, and some of the cases I wanted to find the 7 names because it would have been nice to to mention them here, to remember them.
Yeah, thank you.
They all died fighting, or they were executed after being made prisoners. And Rita Rosani was especially a great.
Yeah,
great
exactly.
yes.
And the literature that has been written, I mean, in literary terms, is well, it's something, considering that nobody's actually talked about her in historiography, generally speaking, and yet there are 3 books in literary terms, which is something. I think one of them was written actually by a British author who is living in Verona. So
yes, I have that book. Yes, I haven't read it though.
Yeah, neither do I, but I have a compass paper in a month on it, so I should be better to read it very quickly.
So you're doing, sorry, you're doing research about that?
Yes, yes.
Okay, perhaps we should keep in touch.
Yeah, definitely. It would be very nice. Yes, please.
Please find me on the, or maybe Amy can give you my email later on or something.
Good.
Okay, I'm on Twitter and Facebook, and I have a YouTube.
Well, I'm not, but I will drop you an email.
Okay.
Good.
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions. I'm just aware of time, so we'll definitely continue questions, because I think Chiara's talk now is going to link to what Gianluca has just said. Gianluca, could you give Chiara the host privileges, please, so she can share her.
Okay. Also, Bill Niven entered the waiting room. Admit. Shall I admit? No, I don't think we should. No, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yes. So how do I do that?
So if you hover over Chiara, you'll see 3 dots, and you can just make her the host.
Mm-hmm. Make host.
Yes.
Yes.
Wonderful. Okay, so next up we have Dr. Chiara Renzo, and she holds a PhD from a joint doctoral program at the Universities of Florence and Florence and Siena. Her doctoral thesis entitled "Where Shall I Go? Jewish Displaced Persons in Italy, 1943 to 1951." As part of her doctoral research supported by the Rothschild Foundation, Chiara focused on the experiences of Jewish displaced children in refugee camps and children's home in post-war Italy. Today, Chiara's presentation deals with the child welfare policy and practices in the context of the post-war refugee emergency in Europe. Her research focuses on different aspects of the rescue and rehabilitation of Jewish DPs after the Holocaust and the history of Jewish humanitarian organisations. More recently, she's working on a project on fascist internment system in Tuscany at the University of Florence. So, Chiara, thank you so much, and over to you.
Thank you, Amy, for inviting me and for organizing this event. I want just to add some information that maybe can be interesting about Jews who join the resistance. There is this project of the Fondazione Cedek, which is the Jewish Documentation Center. I don't know how to translate it, but they are publishing now on their website some information about the Jews who joined the resistance. I don't know if there is also something in English, but if you want, I will share the link in the chat. So my presentation deals with the experience of the Jewish displaced children in post-war Italy and those individuals or organizations who assisted them in their daily life needs and in preparing them for future life in Palestine. I will focus on the role of the Jewish soldiers serving in the Allied Army, who laid the ground for a particular kind of a rehabilitation program in children homes or youth villages that in the context of the refugee camps in post-war Italy were part of the HaShoah. HaShoah is a Hebrew term which means preparation, and it refers to a sort of collective living inspired by kibbutz lifestyle. And in this HaShoah, children receive the necessary training, ideological, practical, and educational training for emigration to Palestine, to be the future pioneer, the Chalutzim. So I will start from this map, which depicts Italy in the second half of 1943. From the summer, the Allies arrived from North Africa to Sicily and began to liberate the southern regions of Italy. The situation, of course, evolved not only from the military point of view, but also from the political point of view. So during this summer, the fascist regime collapsed and the monarchy fled to the south of Italy under the Allies, and signed this armistice in September 1943, which declared Italy surrender. In the liberated regions, anti-fascist parties start to plan the organization of a new government, while partisan groups coordinated the resistance opposing fascism and its internal allies in the country. However, at the same time, the northern region were occupied by Germans who supported Mussolini in establishing the Italian Social Republic. In 1943, in this part of Italy, in the non-liberated part of Italy, almost 7,000 Jews were deported from the country to Nazi extermination camps. This number includes both Italian and non-Italian Jews. The second point I would like to emphasize is related to the fascist internment system. When Italy joined the war in June 1940, the fascist regime interned all those people who were considered dangerous for public order during the war. These include 400 Italian Jews who were suspected on political basis, and 6,000 foreign Jews classified as enemy aliens. In Italy, civilian internment was carried out according to two options. The first one was the so-called free internment, internamento libero in Italian, which consisted in the obligation to reside in certain small towns, which were typically far from industrial or military or strategic areas. And the second option was internment in concentration camps, which forced internees to move from in specific structure, which were most of the time were existing buildings, which were readapted for this purpose. So in this map, since I focused as a case study on Tuscany, I just want to show you how the density of these concentration sites. The red one are the concentration camps. Some of them were already open in 1940, and some of them were open when Germany occupied Italy, and Mussolini and Italy also start to deport Jews to Nazi concentration camps. The blue one are those towns used as free internment sites. And in Tuscany, only in Tuscany, I map 96 towns. So this is just to give you an idea of the fascist internment system. Even if the living condition in these concentration sites were considered bearable, the situation gets worse after the armistice, when some of these sites became part of that mechanism of deportation to the extermination camps. So became part of the final solution system, let's say. So why I'm emphasizing this aspect? Because there is a very little awareness of the fascist internment system in the public memory, and of how these internments serve as a mechanism of deportation and extermination in Nazi camps. It is also important because the very rare times that the story of the Jewish DPs is remembered in the public sphere, the trend is to consider the Jewish DPs as people coming from German concentration camps but some of them, especially at the beginning, since 1943, were already in Italy. Part of these people became DPs already in when the Allies arrived from the south in 1943, and they were mostly Jews who entered Italy during the 30s with the aim to emigrate, to leave Italy, to use Italy as an embarkation site, but they were stuck in Italy because of the introduction of the internment measures. So while those interned in the south were saved from the liberation, from the arrival, this early arrival of the Allies, the other people, the other Jews interned in the regions non-liberated by the Allies, were deported and exterminated. So in 1943, when the Allies invaded the South Italy, the first corps of Jewish DPs was formed by around 2,000 non-Italian Jews liberated by the fascist concentration camp of Peramonti di Tarzia in Calabria, which is the region forming the foot of Italy. As you know, among the Allied, as we all know from Gianluca's presentation, among the Allied army, there were the Palestinian units, the Jewish soldiers from Palestine, who enrolled as volunteers in the British Army and arrived from North Africa, and later became better known as the Jewish Brigade. Peramonti was the key site where liberated Jews met for the first time the Jewish soldiers, who provided help and assistance while the war was still going on, and no humanitarian missions were allowed to work in Italy. So the soldiers were mainly young men in their 20s, graduates of Zionist youth movements and members of kibbutzim, who in their oral testimonies and official reports, instead of they insist on the instinct that moved them to prioritize children and youth in this early phase of the rescue operation. And in these two photos, we can see the children of Peramonti while they were still internees of the concentration camp. This concentration camp was, while many of the other concentration camps in Italy were established in existing building, Peramonti was built as a concentration camp. And many of the internees were Jews, and this was a very crowded concentration camps. There were around 100 children, and they received the help of the Italian Jewish community until 1943. So they were able to organize schools for children. And you can see here that there were different types of schools for religious children or for, let's say, secular children, to simplify. So these are some photos from the concentration camp. At the end of January 1944, the Jewish soldiers informed the Jewish agency about the upcoming selection of the first group of 20 children from Peramonti for the creation of the first HaShoah, which was called Rishonim, which in Hebrew means the first ones, and it was established in the hill of Italy, in the town of, close to the town of Bari. Jewish soldiers' testimonies and reports shed light also on other aspects, which was the initial idea to run this program in a general Zionist framework, which should avoid partisanship in order to not compromise unity. And the Jewish soldiers who ran the first HaShoah, which was Tzvi Ankuri, remember in his testimony, and I quote, "The idea was to not give up to ideology, but to get different Zionist ideologies working together. Rishonim was the only HaShoah kibbutz which had participants from both Betar, Hashomer HaTzair, as well as Sachaz. This first and only example challenging the successful unique experience, was later to be changed with the political criterion taking precedence on Aliyah selection. And indeed, Ankuri referred to the fact that later HaShoah became, in a few months, HaShoah became affiliated to different political parties, which in a way that reflects the political consensus of the various political parties in Palestine ruled also the Jewish DP's migration quotas from Europe to Palestine. We cannot. I mean, it's difficult to say something about the selection criteria that move the Jewish soldiers when they select the children for the HaShoah. We can assume that what motivated, for instance, parents to entrust their children to the Jewish soldiers was, first of all, the fact that HaShoah responded to daily problems and provide an educational program and a concrete project of resettlement while the war was still going on, and even later when all the doors of many countries, the gates of many countries were closed to the refugees. Many parents voluntarily separated from their children because children homes and HaShoah in general gave the children the opportunity to envisage a better future. And after the war, when other children arrived without parents, many of them saw in these children homes a warm surrogate family. And in this slide, you can see the testimony of children from Rishonim, the first HaShoah, which was Shaul Hirsch. He was 14 years old at that time, and he remembered each of us had a broken identity. Zionism was the answer to this problem. Thus, we became enthusiastic Zionists. We saw before us the adult generation who got lost. Their wish was to go back somewhere. They believed that the war would end and that they would resume their lives just from the point where they had left them off. We were young, but none of us believed it or wanted it. After the war, the situation of the refugee camps changed a little bit because the refugee camps were all over Italy, not only in the south. We were discussing, I don't know if you can see my mouse moving, but this is Ferramonti, the first place that I mentioned. And Santa Maria al Bagno, I will talk now about Santa Maria al Bagno, which is here in the southern edge of the hill of Italy. And I mentioned just a few minutes ago, Bari, which was the place where the Jewish soldiers established the first HaShoah. But as you can see, there were DP camps and HaShoah all over Italy after the war. So in May 1944, all Rishonim children legally moved to Palestine, except for two whose parents did not want let them to live alone. They were replaced mainly by children arriving from Yugoslavia, from the sea to the coast of southern Italy. However, already in October 1944, the first HaShoah Rishonim was closed, and all the the remaining member were sent to this small village in the south of Italy called Santa Maria al Bagno, where the Allies created this particular DP camp, requisitioning the villas, the summer villas of the local owners, of the local people. One of these villas, you can see one of these villas in the slide, as the villa looks like today. This villa served as an HaShoah, which was called Abonim. And I would like to share with you some testimonies, but maybe it's better to wait the end of the presentation, so I will be able to easily look for the testimonies online. So I will show you later the testimonies from Gila Eitan, who talk about his experience in the HaShoah in Santa Maria al Bagno. At the end of the military operation, new DPs arrive in Italy, including many children, and among them there was also Shmuel Shilo. We will listen about his testimonies later if we have time. Shmuel Shilo was born in Lutsk, which was in Poland, but now is Ukraine, and he became in Israel a famous, popular actor. But he was also children in one of the Aksharot, built by the Jewish soldiers in Italy. In particular, he was in Selvino Children Home, which is close to Milan, in the foothills of the Alps. Selvino Children Home was established and run by the Jewish soldiers Moshe Zeiri, that you can see in this photo, in a former fascist boarding school called Sciesopoli. And Selvino was on many occasions prized as a children paradise. And indeed, many children, hundreds of children, most of them were orphans, found their home in a warm environment after the war in this Akshara. Zeiri ran Selvino Children Home according to the secular socialist principle of his movement, his Zionist movement, which was Gordonia. Children studied for half a day, in particular Hebrew, the history of the Jewish people, the history of Zionism, and the history of Eretz Israel, and dedicated the other half of the day to housework and agricultural work. The general goal of the Akshara in general, but also the Selvino Akshara, was to teach children collective responsibility, self-help, and mutual aid. As one of the most documented children home in Italy, the story of Selvino can help us understand also the challenges of this model of collective rehabilitation and the debate and tensions behind the meaning and the aims of rehabilitation and children welfare. For instance, some of the social workers of the Joint, which was an American humanitarian organization who played a significant role in rehabilitating, in reconstructing the Jewish community in Europe after the war, not only in Europe. The full name is American Jewish Joint Distribution Committee, which is also known as JDC or Joint. The social workers of the Joint sometimes express their doubts regarding Zeiri one-directional disciplines and perceive the Zionist children home as a form of control over Jewish DPs' education and resettlement. And these discussions mainly revolve around the personality and the pedagogical approach of its leader, who was recognized as a paternal figure, but also as a strong and sometimes authoritative leader who sacrificed children's needs for his political ideals. But in other reports of the Joint, we always find good impression of this children home. It was very. It depends on who visit the children home. They gave different opinion about the educational program of the children home. Other discussion about the children home come from the testimonies of the children. Sometimes from these testimonies we can recognize that the individual needs of the children were downsides in favor of the collective needs. For example, Zeiri discouraged the choice of children to rejoin their relatives in close refugee camps, or in other cases, small but not rare conflicts between Zeiri and the children were related to food. Some of them remember that Zeiri didn't understand the children's special hunger, referring to a sort of obsession concerning food, of course deriving from the experience of the war. And finally, other tensions were reflect into the children home lives came from the political tensions among the Zionist parties working among the refugee in Italy. Here you can see a part of a sentence from a letter that Matilde Cassin, which was an Italian Jew who played an important role during and after the war, but especially she established with Moshe Zeiri Selvino. Soon after the establishment of Selvino, Matilde Cassin was finally able to reunite with her fiancé, which was a Florentine Jew who made Aliyah during the war, Max Varadi. And he was finally able to come back to Italy and to reunite with Matilde. So they met in Florence, and Matilde Cassin tried to ask to Moshe Zeiri to involve his husband to be in running Selvino. But this cooperation never happened because Matilde Cassin fiancé was part of this religious Zionist movement, Hapoel HaMizrahi. So Moshe Zeiri didn't like to mix, to change the program of his children homes, and this collaboration never took place. But in this letter, Matilde Cassin wrote to Zeiri, and I quote, "I believe that a perfect collaboration between the three of us would be possible. Are you ready for this, Moshe? I think that our home must be a home for political parties, must not be a home for political parties, as we must give our children those spiritual and moral values which are above parties, eternal. We must be able to collaborate all together on the same level, since we all have the same method and the same ideal. But as I told you, political tensions didn't help this collaboration, and Moshe Zeiri continued to run Selvino until 1948, when all the children came to Palestine. Max Varadi and Matilde Cassin opened another children home for religious children close to Florence. And if I have time, I would like to show you these two short testimonies. This is the list of the children home in Italy. Do I have time?
Yeah, that's fine.
I'm not sure I will be able to do this. How can I go? Okay, this is an online exhibition of Yad Vashem, and there are many photos from the DP camps in Italy. Can you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So I wanted to show you two short testimony. The first one is from Shmuel Shilo, who joined Selvino, and he remembered the meeting with the Jewish soldiers. So let's see if you can listen to the audio. It's okay.
אנחנו רואים לפנינו משאיות עם מגן דוד, ושם עומדים חיילים של הבריגד וצועקים כל הזמן מהר 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 מהר, ואנחנו מגיעים למשאיות ואומרים תעלו מהר ואנחנו לא מסוגלים. אנחנו רואים פעם הראשונה חיילים יהודים עם תו, חלק מדברים יידיש, רובם מדברים עברית, אבל חלק ידעו יידיש, חלק שלא מבינים יידיש. הם עומדים ומזרזים אותם, ואנחנו עומדים ובוכים. הסתובבתי כמו סהרורי. מכוניות עם מגן דוד, חיילים עם מגן דוד ועם נשק. מדברים כולם עברית, פקודות בעברית. אני כבר לא מדבר על האוכל בשפע. חבר'ה על אופנועים, אבא קובנר עולה על המשאית, לפניו אופנוע, עם הרעש של אופנוע, כדי לפנות לו דרך. שולטים. זה היה מהפך אדיר, ונורא נורא גם רגיש. את הימים האלה אני לא אשכח לעולם, כי זאת הייתה הפעם הראשונה שאתה פוגש חיילים או יהודים שהם רוצים שתאכל, שהם רוצים שתתלבש, שמגינים עליך, שדואגים לך, שהם רוצים רק לטובתך.
And here you can find other testimonies of this moving meeting between the survivors and the Jewish soldiers. And I wanted to show you also these testimonies, who is from Gila Eitan. She was part of an Akshara in the hill of Italy, in that villa. One of those villas were part of the Santa Maria al Bagno DP camp. And
שמה כבר הגיעו חיילים בריגד ואמרו לנו שרוצים להקים לנו הכשרה, כי אנחנו הולכים לארץ ישראל. והגיע אחד ושני והרצאות, והכניסו לנו את זה לאט לאט בראש. היה מטבחון, וכל שבוע אישה אחת הייתה אחראית על אוכל שהייתה מבשלת לכולם. מה זה אומר? היינו מקבלים קונסרבים, והיינו נותנים לאיטלקים קונסרבים, ולתמורת זה הם נתנו לנו ביצים, קראנו לזה קמביה וובי, וגם ירקות, ואז כל פעם אישה אחת הייתה מבשלת אוכל בשביל כולם. אמא שלי הייתה מבשלת הכי טובה, וכולם חיכו שמטילדה קראו לה שהיא תבשל, ואז יש אוכל טוב. הייתה עושה מהקורן ביף כל מיני פצ'קרה. העמיסו אותנו על מסעיות, לא ידענו מה מו, מה פתאום. עכשיו אני לא זוכרת אם פה כבר או בשני כבר הגיעו הבריגדה, החיילים, ואז הם אמרו שהם מקימים הכשרה, אבל רק ילדים בלי, כמובן בלי הורים, הכשרה לזה. והקימו לנו הכשרה במקום שאני גם לא יודעת איך קוראים לו. היה לנו ככה, מדריך שהוא היה חייל מגשר, קיבוץ גשר, קראו לו יוסף לשמן, ואנחנו אהבנו אותו, זה אי אפשר לתאר, הוא היה בשבילנו אלוהים. עכשיו, תחשבי דבר אחד, החיילים האלה לא באו כל יום הביתה, הם התגעגעו לארץ בצורה בלתי רגילה, ואת כל הגעגועים האלה הם העבירו אלינו. אנחנו חשבנו שארץ ישראל זה משהו שאי אפשר להשיג אותו בכלל, גן עדן.
מה הוא סיפר?
הוא סיפר כל כך דברים טוב, הוא היה יקה. הוא היה יקה שגם התחנך בחברת נוער. מה הוא סיפר? על הקיבוץ, וכמה שזה נפלא, וכמה שזה טוב. ומה אני אגיד לך? זה שלנו. אני לא יכולה לזכור, אבל הוא, בשבילנו זה, אם אנחנו נגיע לארץ ישראל, אנחנו הגענו לגן עדן.
So, this is just to give you like broader picture, because the Jewish soldiers played a political role, but also was an important human role in rebuild the life of the Jewish DPs in Italy. So I can give the privilege to the other speaker now. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Chiara. That was a really informative talk, and it was really great to listen to survivors, on your, as during a Yom HaShoah event. So to hear testimony was a real privilege. I'm just going to change the order slightly, if that's okay. Professor Bill Niven is going to talk now because I think he's a bit pressed for time, and I know we're running over slightly, and Miriam is going to talk to us about her trips to Ukraine, so it's a good job it's recorded, so if anybody misses anything. Miriam is also going to say a prayer and light a candle at the end of the talk, so I'm just going to hand over to Bill now to talk about
Amy, sorry, can I just Sorry, Bill, can I just read the names now of those who were awarded? Sorry, because I need to
sorry, don't want to
leave
intervene. It's fine if Miriam wants to talk first, Amy. That's absolutely fine. I'm not in a rush. I can speak whenever. So if we want to stick to the original order with Miriam first, that's absolutely fine.
Okay.
Whatever you prefer.
You're muted.
Yeah, well, if Gianluca, would you like to read the names of those who were awarded?
Yes, because
and I'm ready to go whenever.
Hi, Miriam.
So first of all, I apologize with all of you, especially with Bill and Miriam, because I need to leave because I have a class. But I'm sure I will be able to listen to the recording. And now, just as my last contribution, I would like to read out loud, to honor really the name of the 7 Italian Jews who lost their life fighting against the Nazi and fascism. These are not, of course, the only one who died. Those are simply the one who were awarded the Golden Medal of Honor, so the highest, honor in Italy. And the names are Eugenio Calò, Eugenio Colorni, Eugenio Curiel, Sergio Forti, Mario Iacca, Rita Rosani, and Ildebrando Vivanti.
No, it's special to hear their names read out on during this memorial event. So thank you so much for reading them out. Well, I'll introduce Professor Bill Niven now. Thank you so much, Gianluca, and we'll speak soon.
Amy, sorry, I'm not able to give back.
Control. Yeah, so if you hover over me, you'll see 3 dots and it says make host.
No, maybe Gianluca can help me. How did you do? You are muted.
No, yes, she's right. The 3 dots next to the right up corner, top corner right.
Right.
3 dots,
No.
3 puntini.
I don't have the 3 dots.
Hover over Amy's face.
No.
Mm.
Maybe can I give the possibility to share to all the participants?
Can you give it to me if you hover over my face? Do you see the 3 dots?
Okay, let me
I can
try.
pass it on.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm the host now.
Okay,
So,
sorry for interrupting.
No, that's fine. Wonderful. Miriam, you can stay as the host because Bill and I don't have PowerPoint. So to introduce Professor Bill Niven now.
Sorry, am I interrupting again? It's fine if Miriam goes first. I mean, I'm quite happy to have Miriam go first. That was the original order. There's no problem, and I can speak after Miriam.
okay.
It's okay.
Okay. No, thank you ever so much. Okay, so introducing Miriam Halahmy, who is an author. She has written books such as The Emergency Zoo, Saving Hanno, Always Here for You, Rip to the Rescue. So they're just a few. And Miriam has also written novels on the Kindertransport. That's how we were connected. And Miriam's going to talk to us about her, well, several trips that you've done to Ukraine. Miriam recently sent me some pictures of her trip to Babin Yar site, obviously the one that we know that was partly destroyed recently. She has written poems about her experiences there. She's also been to the Bagnarov ravine. Her synagogue is twinned with a community in Ukraine. So thank you, Miriam, and over to you.
Thank you. So I'm going to try this share screen and see if I can get this right. Share. Yes. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yep, works great.
Yep. You can see my screen. It looks a bit small to me. Yes, I think that's better. Okay, well, thank you very much, Amy, for inviting me on this talk. And it's been so interesting hearing what everyone has to say. And I found those testimonies at the end of Chiara's talk really overwhelming. This stunning reversal that gentleman referred to, I think sums it all up. So my name is Miriam Halahmy, and I belong to a synagogue called the Northwestern Reformed Synagogue, which is in Golders Green in Northwest London. And it's one of the largest Reformed synagogues, one of the largest synagogues in Great Britain, and belongs to what we call the Reformed Synagogue movement. It's often known as Eilidh or Eilidh Gardens. And when the Soviet Union fell, Jewish communities started to emerge. And so the Reformed synagogues of Great Britain twinned each synagogue with an emerging Jewish community in Ukraine. And my synagogue was twinned with Kirch. And I know I'd never heard of it either. So we went on a visit, and here's my map. I don't know if this, yeah, here we go. Oh yes, there you can see it. Okay, so here is Crimea, and here is Kerch. And 1,000 kilometers north up here is Kyiv. And Kerch is on the easternmost tip of the Crimea. Simferopol is where you fly into, and then it's a 4-hour bumpy journey to Kerch. As you probably know, when the Soviet Union fell, the infrastructure fell with it. And there were a lot of things that weren't done, like potholes in the roads. And Kerch is separated from Russia by the Kerch Strait, which you can't quite see on this map, but you might have heard of it. When Russia occupied Crimea in 2014, they sailed across the Kerch Strait, and they've now built a bridge. It's 4 kilometers wide. And the boys from the Kerch community told me they went surfing in the Sea of Azov. I made a trip there in 2010 with my community, and I also made a trip in 2013, 6 months before the occupation of the Crimea by Russia. So you may or may not know that at the end of the Second World War, Stalin designated 13 cities as hero cities in the Soviet Union because of how they'd stood up to the Nazis. So you have the obvious candidates, Kyiv, Moscow, Stalingrad, but Kerch is also a hero city. It's the smallest one. And when you see those photographs of the Maidan Square, and there's this long column in the middle of it with a sort of golden eagle at the top, that is the monument for the hero city. And there's one of those in Lenin Square in Kerch. And this photo is actually taken in Kyiv, where there are 13 blocks like this with the names of each of the hero cities on it. And this is Kerch's block, and it's filled up with soil from Kerch. And Kerch actually had to repel the Nazis twice. And they said that the streets ran red with the blood of the thousands of citizens who were killed there. So this is the synagogue in Kerch. It's a fantastic building. During the Soviet period, it was used as a labor exchange because, of course, there was no religious activity. So there was no Jewish activity during the Soviet Union. And we know that there were people who resisted to that, but most people, it just faded away for them. I mean, I think it's amazing that President Zelensky is identifying himself as Jewish and telling us the history of his family who were persecuted and murdered in the Holocaust. But I would think it's very unlikely that he, like the Jews of Kerch, had much Jewish life growing up. And so the community managed to get the building back when the Soviet Union fell. So this is the building we were received into extremely warmly. There are over 700 people who come to the community and 250 members. But in order to be part of the Jewish community, you simply have to have one grandparent who is Jewish, because that's what the Nazis said when they persecuted the Jews. And so we were meeting people who had no experience whatsoever at what it meant to light candles on a Friday night, to say prayers, have no Hebrew. And the synagogue didn't have a regular rabbi. There was one rabbi, Misha, who lived in Simferopol, and he was the rabbi of all the communities in the Crimea. So, you know, on a Saturday morning, he might be in one community and not another. And so the community had to find its own leaders and find its own way. When we went along and attended services, we were the ones leading the Hebrew. The community found it very difficult, but the feeling and the atmosphere there was amazing. And they ran a religion school, a nursery, they had fantastic welfare programs. And our synagogue was contributing a grant of around £12,000 a year. I should say at this point that we are no longer twinned because the community has moved towards the more Orthodox Chabad community, who've now taken over and fund the community. And we will be twinning with a community in Poland. So this is Lenin Square, and this is where the soldiers marched through in 2014. And we'd been sitting there 6 months before. It was unbelievable, actually, to see all this on the television and to see the places we'd been. But this memorial is a very, very sad memorial. When the Nazis arrived in Kerch, they moved across the Crimea the winter, December 1941 to 1942, and they murdered 40,000 Jews across the Crimea and announced it Judenrein by the beginning of 1942. They arrived in Kerch at the end of November, And they invited the parents to bring their children, not Jewish parents, just anybody, to a community hall. And over 200 children were brought to the hall. And they gave them coffee and cake laced with poison. And the children died. And this is the memorial to them. And this was their message to the people of Kerch: don't resist us. They then started to round up the Jews. And between December the 1st and December the 5th, 1941, they brought 7,000 Jews on trucks to Bagarov Ravine. Bagarov is a village outside Kerch. The ravine was about 1 kilometer long and quite wide. This is obviously just the remnant of it. It was much bigger, and they lined people up. They made them strip, and they killed them, shot them, men, women, and children. And then the Soviet army pushed the Nazis back, and they arrived at Bagarov Ravine, and they were absolutely horrified. And this is one of the things that still, resonates with me with what's going on today. They rounded up the Nazi commanders, and they were put on trial and hung at the end of the war. They sent a radio program all over the Soviet Union to tell them what the Nazis were doing to the Jews. They were really horrified. And one of the members of the armed forces was Ilya Selvinsky, who is a poet, and he wrote about this. I saw it all, 7,000 souls in that wolf pit. And when I was in the synagogue in Kerch, I found this book by Gitel Gubenko, whose parents were murdered at Bagarov Ravine. And it's called The Book of Sorrows. And in it, she records what happened to the Jews of the Crimea. So I took some names from this, and I wrote this poem about visiting Bagarov Ravine. At Bagarov Ravine, rain spits at us. We do not turn away. Houses stare across the broken road. We know what they have seen. There was nowhere to hide when gunfire lulled them to sleep, and a father driven mad cried out, "Run, my children, run." I saw it all, wrote Ilya Selvinsky. 7,000 souls in that wolf pit. The soldiers gone for vodka. Bullets spent, their cases scattered on the ground. 2 kilometers of frozen blood, red like iron, riveted to the ships, flowed through the straits, naked in the bitter wind. Clerks wrote the list in longhand on the back of wrapping paper as the Jews stood in line, Soviet passports trembling in their hands. Gubenko Nison, office worker, Gubenko Rachel, housewife, Gubenko Sima, dressmaker, Zolotafeskaya Clara, disabled. Entire streets vanished. No one was left to call them out. The family Persia, the family Vishnevsky, no one is forgotten. Nothing is forgotten. The family Persia, the housewife Rachel Gubenko. So when we were in Kerch in 2010, my first visit, it was Yom HaShoah. And next Wednesday evening, the Jewish world will be commemorating the Shoah, the Holocaust, with our memorial service to it. And the community had a memorial service for Yom HaShoah on the Sunday. And the children of the community here are acting out the massacre of the Kerch Jews in the winter of 1941. They are very aware of their history and the history of their ancestors. So Yom HaShoah was begun in Israel in 1949, and ashes and bones from a concentration camp were brought to Israel and buried there. And in the following years, they included desecrated Torah scrolls and other religious objects, because we never throw away broken or damaged religious books. We bury them in graves when people are buried. And Yom HaShoah became established officially in 1959, and it falls on the 27th of Nisan in the Jewish calendar to coincide with the uprising of the Warsaw Ghetto. So the Holocaust Memorial Day is for everyone to remember the Holocaust, but Yom HaShoah is particularly our Jewish memorial to our 6 million dead. And this is Mark, who had his bar mitzvah the day before, lighting the outside candle, the memorial candle for the dead. And when we went to Bagirov Ravine, there was a memorial which the Soviets put up at these massacre sites, but they only talked about the death of Soviet citizens. They did not acknowledge in the Soviet Union that Jews had died here. So the Jewish community created their own memorial, and they placed this at Bagirov Ravine the following year. So after we had been to Kerch, we went to Kyiv, and here's a familiar site. Here's the cathedral that's often shown. And I know that when the war started in Ukraine and the Russians invaded, this square was so often on our news. And I was saying to my husband, well, we were there, we were right there. And I was reviewing my photographs. And here we are in front of, I think it's St. Michael's Church. And our hotel was on the, I think it's the Maidan Square with the column to hit the hero's city. And we were taken around Kyiv by Rabbi Alex Duchovny, who is the leader of the Reformed Jewish community in Kyiv. And during the first week in the war last month, Alex sent us a video which we viewed in our service. And he was in the basement of his building in Kyiv. He was in tears at one point, talking about the horror of the invasion and the worry he had for his community and for everyone. And I believe that Alex has now escaped to safety with his young family. And this is the great synagogue in Kyiv, which the Nazis used as the stables and the Soviets used as a theater for dolls, but it is now being brought back into use as a synagogue. And it has these beautiful stained glass windows. It's very beautiful inside. And it's lovely that it's been restored. So obviously Alex took us to Bagirov Ravine and to Babin Yar. And obviously, like most people, I did know about Babin Yar, but until I went to Kerch and saw Bagirov Ravine, I didn't really understand the extent of what people refer to as the Holocaust by bullets. I didn't even really know that term. And that basically there was no infrastructure for the murder of the 1.5 million Jews in the Soviet Union. They just lined them up in front of anti-tank ditches and dry wells and shot them. And the rehearsal for that was Babin Yar. This is a ravine on the edge of Kyiv. It's now used as a park, and when you walk around it, people are walking there with their children in their pushchairs. But in order to get ready for this, they had to prepare the ravine. So they dug it out and they cut down all the trees on the edge. And yes, local Ukrainians did collaborate with this. We went to this area and then we went to a finger of the ravine to say our memorial prayer. And on this finger of the ravine, the trees have regrown, but then they would have seeded. The soil was enriched by the corpses. So in the distance here, you can see this memorial, and when you come up close, it's a very powerful memorial. Here there are people who are being shot on the other side of the ravine. They're on this very narrow path and they're about to fall in. And this part is where Yevtushenko read out his poem about Babin Yar in the 1960s with a group of poets who just didn't want to keep quiet anymore, I suppose. But once they had practiced what to do at Babin Yar, they then knew what to do throughout the rest of Ukraine and the Crimea. And in fact, Rabbi Duchovny's, Rabbi Duchovny's mother was in the lineup, the lines to go to Babin Yar to be killed, but she managed to run away. As the Nazis approached Kyiv, half the population did manage to run away, and 50% of the Jews went with them, but the other 50% stayed behind. Over 3 days, they shot 36,000 Jews in Babin Yar. But over the period of a year, they shot tens of thousands more. They don't really know how many, maybe 100,000 are there. We also know from all the stories of all the pits, and there are eyewitness accounts in here, that people survived the shootings and climbed out. And there are eyewitness testimonies in this book, which are just gut grinding to read, of people kissing their dead children and then climbing out, shot in their legs and trying to find someone to shelter them. And this is a very telling picture, because here is the TV mast, which you will all have seen was bombed by the Russians, knowing, I am sure, how close it is to the memorial of Babyn Yar, because here's a member of our party and you can see how close we are. And so the shrapnel, I'm sure, will have hit some of these memorials. It's quite appalling, really. And so the next picture I find a very difficult one. So this is the memorial to the children in Babyn Yar, and their heads are severed. I've never ever seen a statue like this, but I suppose it says it all, really. This next picture is quite poignant. A child laying a flower here, and you can see how the area is a park and there are visitors. And I suppose that the thing that is constantly resonating with me is that the Soviet soldiers who came to Bagorov Ravine and saw those 7,000 naked bodies lying in that pit are the grandfathers and great-grandfathers of the Russian soldiers who are perpetrating the same horrors themselves. And personally, I can't get my head around it, particularly having been there and met people and seen, you know. Anyway, this has been a bit harrowing, so I decided to end on a nice note. So this is the children of the Kerch community. At the time we were there, they're all young men and women now, but they're only about 6, 7 years old. And they've drawn these posters, again, because the Jewish philosophy, this is Yom HaShoah, but the Jewish philosophy is to choose life. And they've drawn pictures of people with the sun shining. And when we have a drink, we say l'chaim, to life. And this is a very interesting picture. There were people in Kerch who missed the Soviet Union. They kept the heat on because the infrastructure just collapsed and they had no medical services. We were providing insulin for people with diabetes in the community, anything that would help. And this is what they call the warm room. This is only a very tiny 2-bedroom flat, but the community paid for the heating to be on in this flat once a week for the senior members of the community, and they provided them with a meal. And you can see they're sitting here. And this gentleman always fascinated me. He is the leader of the Krimchak community. The Krimchaks are a sect of Judaism, and so the Nazis annihilated them as well. And there are only 60 members of his community left in Crimea. The Nazis also murdered the Tatars, and murdered, I think, over 2,000 Tatars because they said they had an association with the Jews. And my final picture is this one of our young teenagers. And this is Daniel, who came with another teenager, Julio, to London. And I first met them there, and then I met them again in the community. They're now in their mid-20s, and I think Daniel went to join the army in Israel. But we often quote Rabbi Nachman of Bratislav, who set up the Hasidic community. It's an amazing quote. He said, "This whole world is a narrow bridge, but the essential thing is never to be afraid." So, time for Bill to talk, unless anyone has any questions. I'll try and give this back to Amy.
Thank you so much, Miriam. That was incredibly moving, especially for you to read out your poem as well, and to remember those that are remembered in that book. Thank you ever so much for sharing your personal experiences as well. So I'm going to hand over to Emeritus Professor Bill Niven, who is the author of numerous books on memory of the Holocaust. He's published on Facing the Nazi Past, The Book Involved Child, The Representations of Flight and Expulsion in East Germany, in East German prose, and Bill's created several exhibitions on the Holocaust and the Kindertransport. And if you check out Bill's social media, you'll see the front cover of his new book, Yud Zeus. So Bill, over to you.
Thanks, Amy. On April the 10th, 2021, on Yom HaShoah, a new synagogue was opened at the site of the Babyn Yar massacre in Kiev, which was just what Miriam was talking about there. And it was the first Jewish prayer space to be offered there, as I understand it. As you know, some 33,000 Jews were shot at Babin Yar on just 2 days, between September 29th and September 30th, 1941. And that opening of the synagogue was attended by Zelensky and world Jewish leaders. And that was just literally a year ago. And just under a year later, the international press reported that a Russian missile had hit the developing memorial site at Babin Yar, of which the synagogue was a cornerstone, and there was a public and political outcry. As it happened, the reports were largely untrue, although, as Miriam said, there was certainly probably some damage. But for Zelensky, it was as if Holocaust memory itself had been attacked, accompanying a genocide in Ukraine launched by Putin, one comparable to the Nazi genocide itself. And Zelensky's repeated his charge that Russia is committing genocide in Ukraine, a charge seemingly borne out by the massacre of civilians in Bucha, for instance, and the siege of Mariupol, although it's also reminding me of the siege of Leningrad, in which tens of thousands of civilians have already died. There are countless reports of the killing of civilians, brutal killings just for the sake of it, it seems, in most cases. And there are fears that the refugee crisis triggered by the war is in one way for Putin to carry out the ethnic cleansing of Ukraine, all in the interests of Russification. Zelensky has also compared the Russian attack to the Holocaust directly, a comparison which made him few friends in the Knesset when he spoke to the Israelis there and has raised eyebrows elsewhere. There are two questions then, I suppose. Is it genocide? And if it is it comparable to the Holocaust? And you'll find a wide range of answers on this online. And you'll find those who worry that Zelensky has a Sovietized view of his family's history, Jewish victims subsumed under Soviet victimhood, until the war helped him discover his roots, all in the interest of a useful anti-Russian rhetoric. And you'll find those who wonder why he equates Ukrainian suffering now with Jewish suffering then, when Ukrainians were amongst those who rounded up the victims of Babin Yar. But none of this, I don't feel, matters as much as the urgency and poignancy of Zelensky's appeal to the Western world to recognize and heed our moral obligation to intervene, one which his Holocaust rhetoric quite consciously does much to validate. Our world is a place where we have never again, meaning never again Auschwitz, but it should also be a place where we say never again war, never again refugees, never again invasion of your neighbor. But the mantra never again is generally reserved for Auschwitz. So Zelensky not unnaturally hones his assessment of what's happening in Ukraine, I almost said the Ukraine, as close as he can to the Holocaust. Rather than just arguing whether or not what Putin is doing is genocide, we also need to condemn what he is doing with equal vehemence, because it's a war of aggression, to use the term deployed at Nuremberg, because it generates millions of refugees, because it brings with it war crimes. Of course, we do this too, and war crimes are being investigated. But Zelensky's constant reference to the Holocaust reveals his sense that no other kind of appeal will carry the same force. We must remember the Holocaust. We must say never again Auschwitz, but we cannot place the barrier for what we consider worthy of never again so high that other forms of injustice and atrocity seem less never againable. Ukrainian Holocaust survivors, the few that remain, have been fleeing. Some have found refuge in Germany, the country which inflicted the Holocaust on Jews. Again and again, we reach such stories. In the Daily Mail, for instance, it's remarkable that Germany can now offer protection to those it once persecuted, and that they feel safer there than in Ukraine or indeed Russia, from where Jews have been fleeing, as well as cultural stars such as the great writer Litskaya, who's now in exile in Berlin. But rather than just condemn Russia for forcing out Jews a second time, we might also want to remember how a number of Jews in Britain, following Brexit, also felt compelled to return to Germany or Austria, the country they or their families had fled from during the Nazi period. Jews no longer felt safe in Britain either. Of course, I'm not comparing Brexit to what is possibly genocide in Ukraine. I'm not doing that. But I am trying to say that in judging others, we should also, I think, take a careful look at ourselves. One thing is for sure, Putin's attack on the Ukraine is in part motivated by anti-Semitism. Comments by Putin and Medvedev cast Zelensky in the role of the infiltrator from the West, the lackey of cosmopolitanism, very much in the style of Soviet campaigns against Jews in the 1940s and 1950s. In fact, Zelensky is seen in the same light as the Hungarian-American Holocaust survivor and philanthropist George Soros, the hate figure of Hungarian Premier Viktor Orban, who blames him for supporting an influx of Muslim refugees to bring down Christianity. Jewish conspiracy theories are rife. And of course, in these crackpot theories, Jews will consort with anyone, be it Ukrainians or Muslims, to do the devil's work. Yet here too, we have no reason to be smug, because anti-Semitism is alive, not just in Eastern Europe, it's also very alive in Western Europe. And attacks on Holocaust memory are coming not just from Poland or Hungary, but also from within our own universities. There's much to be done if we're to stop the rise of anti-Semitism. Holocaust memory may call itself global, anti-Semitism really is. And that was all I really wanted to say. Thanks.
Thank you ever so much, Bill. I think that your sentence where you said, no more war, no more refugee crises, we say never again. And I think that sentence particularly stood out for me. Okay. I think that was a really moving talk. Thank you so much. If we got any questions before we come to the commemoration aspect of the talk? No, okay. So I'm going to hand over to Miriam once more for the final part of this talk today. Thank you all for being with us. Miriam, over to you for the commemoration aspect. Oh, sorry, Miriam, I think you're muted.
Yeah, I don't need to host or anything, do I? No. Okay, so, well, thanks very much, Amy. Well, I've got my yellow candle with me. This is the Jewish Memorial candle, the Yahrzeit candle, which we will be lighting on the eve of Yom HaShoah. And my candle is in memory of Rezel Landorf of Horian, who was murdered at Auschwitz in 1944, age 3. I'm going to light the candle, and then I'm going to say the Jewish Memorial prayer for the dead, the Kaddish. But I will stand up for that. I'll try and say it loudly because I won't sit down to recite it. Yit Gadal v'Yit Kadash Shemei Rabbah. Amen. Be'alma divrach hirutei, be'yamlich malkutei, b'chayechon u'be'yomechon u'chayei dikol bet Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei Shemei Rabbah mevarach le'olam almaya almaya. Yit barach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'a v'yitramam v'yitnaseh. V'yit hada v'yit aleh v'yit halel shemei dikusha berichu. Le'ala min kol bechata. V'shirata tushbechata v'nechemata de'aman be'alma v'imru amen. Yehei shama rabba min shama v'chayim aleinu v'el kol Yisrael v'imru amen. Oseh shalom bimromav. Hu yaseh shalom aleinu v'el kol Yisrael v'al kol ha'olam v'imru amen. May the maker of peace in the highest bring this peace upon us and upon all Israel and upon all the world. Amen.
Thank you so much, Miriam. It was really special to end with that note and also to see the candle as well. Thank you so much. So yeah, this concludes the talk. Thank you ever so much for commemorating Yom HaShoah with us. As you know, there'll be more events next week, but thank you for being with us today. And yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Miriam.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.